Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so happy to be here with you today to talk about toxic workplaces, yay, and how to shift your leadership practice. So to start, just a little bit about me. Since my absolute first breath, I've always been a member of a team because I was born as the youngest of 14 children. So that probably was my precursor many years later to enter the social work field, where I worked for over 20 years in a variety of different social work agencies, from addiction to mental health, corrections, women assault prevention, it was called back then. And in 2010, when I decided to retire from my private practice, I did some reevaluation on what did I know and what could I do that was meaningful and would have a huge impact on the world. And I decided to specialize in team dynamics. And so for the last 9 years, that's what my work has been around, specifically with nonprofit organizations, because I'm so passionate about bringing their mission to life. So in that regard, I work as a catalyst and executive coach. I'm also the author of Unleashing Team Potential, Lessons for Managers for My Canine Friends, and that has a whole story behind it in terms of my dog Josie when she came to live with us and her shenanigans. So if you choose to buy my book, you will get lots of little nuggets and laughs courtesy of Josie. And I also speak. I'm a professional speaker. And so enough about me. What I'd like to know is who's joining us today.
Great, so I've just opened a poll on your screen, everyone. So you should see that now. And you can go ahead and just vote right on the screen there in front of you. Just select whichever one works for you. Senior leadership role, middle management level, frontline, or other. And I see we've got most people have had a chance to vote now, so I'm going to go ahead and share these results with everyone. So Sylvia, it looks like we have the majority leadership and middle management today at 29 and 39%. And then we have 21% frontline and 11% other.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Marina, and thank you everybody for voting. So I do appreciate that there's different levels of organization. You're coming from different levels of organization, and I will let you know that I do have a bias that most of my work is done at the senior leadership level and middle management level, and so a lot of my comments today will be directed more to that level because that's where I see real change happening in an organization. Everybody is more than free to listen and glean any nuggets that you can as well. And if you feel like it's not for you, that's okay, and I won't be offended if you drop off. Okay, so today what we're going to talk about is accountability. And when I talk about accountability, I do it from a very different perspective than most people. So we'll get into what do I mean by that. Conflict, but we're going to talk about conflict not so much at the interpersonal level, but at the organizational level, and how that sometimes can very much look like interpersonal conflict. The third place we're going to go today is on gratitude. It's such an important practice for personally, but also within your team and organization. Then we'll talk a little bit about trust, and then we're going to get into the energy that you bring to all that you do and how important that is. So my story is that in June of 1992, I got my dream job. It was absolutely amazing. I had the opportunity to do all the things that I love to do. I was doing group work, I was doing individual therapy, I got the opportunity to teach and lecture and be part of a really cool interdisciplinary team. And it was amazing. And for my first 18 months there, I loved it. I had my dream supervisor, I was growing, I loved the clients, and it was amazing. And then all of a sudden, the culture of the organization started to chisel into my experience. And what I started to recognize was throughout the organization, it was really toxic. So there were all sorts of experiences where, you know, management was inconsistent, people would be treated differently. We as coworkers started to confront each other, and we would do it in a really critical, blaming way. We would be given feedback sometimes from our supervisors that was so vague and had so many assumptions in it that when I would say to them, well, help me understand what you mean, can you give me a couple of examples? And I would be told, no, the person hadn't given them that permission to share the examples. So the feedback that I was given prevented me from being able to make change, because at times I was unable to remember or think. And I would leave those sorts of supervisions thinking, people are having issues with me. I don't know who's having issues. I don't know who's going to the boss to sort of rat me out, so to speak. And the stress started to wear on me. I started to become not my positive person that I am, but more critical of other people, more critical and judgmental of myself. I really started to struggle in life. I ended up, and you've heard me speak for a few minutes, so you get a sense that I do like to talk. And what happened was I hit absolute rock bottom. For 3 days, I was unable to speak. All I could do is grunt, because the idea of forming words was too much energy. And what I realized because of this toxic environment was, number one, I wasn't alone. Other people were also suffering. I wasn't the only one in that environment that required antidepressants to be well enough to show up at work. In fact, one of my colleagues was told that he would be a lifer on antidepressants unless and get a job somewhere else. Now, what is the perk in my experience? Number one is I will do everything within my personal power to ensure that no one else has to suffer through a toxic environment. And number two, it fuels the work that I do that I absolutely love doing every single day. And that is helping leaders and organizations understand what's happening in the system as a whole so that they can start to make change. So people want to come to work and are excited about being at work and bring that mission to life. Oftentimes when I'm called into an organization and I'm doing my discovery process, which is just me understanding everything that's happening in the organization from quite a broad perspective, I'm looking at what's the level of accountability in the organization. And what I have discovered time and time again is the lower the accountability in an organization, the lower the trust level is, and the lower the direct communication is. And it seems to be very much a chicken and egg kind of argument, which came first. It's hard to do. However, I found that when we start with the accountability piece, that's where change can happen very, very quickly. In the workplace accountability study, it was discovered that 82% of leaders, and this is about, they self-disclosed, that they either tried and failed to hold people accountable or avoided keeping people accountable. And what I've discovered is it's a very difficult experience for people. People become afraid, so leaders become afraid that they'll offend or that perhaps the direct report that they're addressing is going to attack them, etc. And so accountability often gets lost. And most people don't have formal training in how to offer feedback in a healthy way. Excuse me, I'm getting through a cold here, so if I cough or such, I apologize in advance. So for me and my perspective, accountability really rocks. And it is the only way that an individual or team can totally reach their true potential. Without accountability, we are unable to grow. And accountability for me has 5 key aspects. Clarity, so before I'm making sure that I'm clear in the organization what the needs are and what the mission demands, and that may be things like sharing the strategic plan and how it's going to be actualized. Honesty, I'm going to be willing as your leader to lean into the difficult times for our betterment. Compassion mixed into that. So how can I use compassion and be focused on your growth? Having a growth mindset, and I'm going to get into that in a little bit more detail in a moment and what I mean, and being congruent. So what I say, I do, and vice versa, and everything matches up. So those are the 5 key things that are what I call, and I've coined the phrase, account for ability. And that is how you can help your team rock it every single day. So about the act of accountability is using that clarity, helping people know what the expectations are, using candor or truth in a way that's mixed with compassion. And so that little tiny seedling in the picture can grow and become a huge, beautiful, big tree. So looking at what is the clarity? What does candor look like for you? How do you choose those words that evoke respect, help people, and how can you be specific enough so that people understand exactly what you're suggesting and they can do the self-reflection to make change? Accountability really counts. So in Carol Dweck's book, named Mindset, she talks very much about the fixed mindset and growth mindset. And a fixed mindset says, okay, I am Sylvia, I am not athletic in the least, it is impossible for me to learn how to do a pull-up. The growth mindset, on the other hand, is we're all born with different aspects and different natural skills, and we can hone them. So if you think about Olympic gold medalist, a friend of mine, Sammy Jo Small, who's a 3-time Olympian, 2-time member of a gold medal winning team, she gets excited when she gets feedback. And we were on a board of directors together, and I was asking her questions about the financial situation, which she was responsible for. And some of it just sort of how was she doing it, and I was having difficulty understanding it. And she said, Sylvia, please keep those questions coming. That's how I grow. So if you want to be that Olympian in your organization, you're going to want to start to really work at that account for ability or accountability. And that's enabling responsibility for every individual, including yourself in that organization. Because we all know that a lack of accountability results in dysfunctional team dynamics. It really is a cause and effect. So as you're going about your day-to-day business, think about what is it that I need to use more candor with, or do I need more compassion? How do I bring those things together so that I can speak with my team in a meaningful way so that they really understand how they can grow and how they can be the best that they can be. And in that way, it is not about top-down holding someone accountable. It is more about how can we all grow together from a place of respect and acceptance and growth mindset. Conflict, good old conflict. Many, many times, managers are spending time dealing with conflict, and the HR reporter put out a study saying that managers spent about 30% of their time dealing with conflict. That's a phenomenally expensive thing in organizations. And so what I recognize is that conflict gets stuck because of judgments, assumptions, and blaming that are happening. So if you're in an organization like I worked with when I was in the toxic organization, the judgments, assumptions, and blaming are so interlayered that what would happen is individuals, often myself, because I'm always about growth and how can I be even better than I am today, would we would have conflict. And a number of those individuals that I used to, I'm going to say, fight with on a regular basis at work, I'm friendly with now. And we've talked about how bizarre it is that how can we feel so differently about each other? And what we've recognized in retrospect was that we were expressing the conflict and the stress and the team dynamics. And so we were like the pressure cooker valve, just blowing off the steam so that we could all more or less cope in the situation. And so what my challenge to you is to move from the picture on the left of the two elephants that are headbutting and use curiosity and genuine curiosity. Start to ask questions about that. Look below the surface of the conflict, because oftentimes interpersonal conflict is actually a symptom rather than the cause of what's happening in the organization. And then perhaps you can start to have two people, hopefully they're not cuddling at work, because that's a whole nother issue we're not talking about today. But in any event, that you can get people to start to lean in and have those conversations. Ask yourself, what else is happening around this situation? Is it really just these two individuals having conflict, or are they acting out something else? What are the other factors surrounding the situation impacting them? The Conference Board of Canada has indicated that in Canadian business, conflict costs approximately $16.1 billion a year. 16.1 billion. That's an immense amount of money. So if you've got people doing repetitive conflict and the same issues are coming up time and time again, look at this picture here. This is a picture near my cottage, and if you look at the surface, it looks absolutely beautiful. And trust me, if you look underneath that surface of that water, you're going to find a fairly unpleasant colored water because of all the runoff from the farmers' fields above. We need to get from below that, we need to get below that surface, and look at what other things might be happening. What else, what other factors, and maybe asking questions like, how might we shift through this conflict? What would we need to stop doing? What might we need to start doing? What do we need to pause? Is there something we need to add into this? And start to look at conflict, not so much as, let's bring in another conflict management training, but helping people understand that conflict sometimes is systemic conflict. And if it's systemic conflict, it's very difficult for those individuals who are engaging in that conflict. So look below the surface of the conflict and see what else is there. At this point, I'm just going to pause for a moment and check in with Marina and see if there's any questions.
Yes, Sylvia, we have a great question here about if you could share some examples of how to take questions from a place of judgment to a place of curiosity. Do you have any suggestions for that?
Yes, I do. And this one sounds extremely easy, like much of what I present, but it's very difficult to put in place. What I suggest you do is you start to ask questions you do not have the answers for. So think about that for a moment. When I'm in conflict, I generally have a fairly fixed mindset thinking, so-and-so is the problem. And so if I'm asking a question that I don't have the answer for, it's forcing my brain to open up, and it's forcing me to look at it from a very different perspective. The other thing that you can say to yourself, what are my assumptions that I'm holding, and what am I judging as right or wrong in this situation? Because I might be judging that I have the right solution and my colleague has the wrong solution, which I see many, many times in nonprofits, because everybody comes with that big P word, passion, into the situation and feel like I know the right way to deal with it. And if mine's the right way, yours is the wrong, and vice versa. So starting to ask questions like, what else have I not noticed here? What am I not seeing? What am I not hearing? What might I not be listening to? And really try and challenge yourself individually to lean into it and look at it from a different perspective.
That's great, Sylvia. Thank you. I think that's very helpful. We can, I think we can carry on. Just a reminder to everyone, though, before Sylvia jumps back in, if you do have questions, please do submit them when you think of them, and we will get to them either during the presentation or at the Q&A afterwards. Thanks, Sylvia.
Thanks, Marina, and thanks for the question. So let's shift gears from conflict to gratitude. Gratitude to me is one of those places where I can get myself back in complete power. So my own personal practice of gratitude is simply being grateful for everything that I have in my life. And some days that feels quite small. And when I practice it, I can switch from being in a less than happy mood to being in a happy mood. And as I do that, my energy is very different to be around. And when we share gratitude and appreciation to another person for what they've done and how they've positively impacted the organization in your case, I challenge you to catch your team members doing great work. So we often think we've got to catch them doing other stuff. No, no, no. Focus on just noticing and catching them doing good work. And then when you see that, be specific on why it's good work. What is it about it that helps the mission of the organization, helps bring the team forward? And it can be in a written form as a handheld note, handheld note. I'm not exactly sure where that thing came from. Anyway, a little note or a sticky memo, perhaps by their desk or their workstation, that they see first thing in the morning when they come in, just saying, really appreciate that you went that extra mile for Patty the client yesterday and helped her get that extra service she needed. Creative thinking, really appreciate it. Or it can be verbal. I'm going to say 4 to 5 years ago, I worked with one organization where it was very toxic. There was a lot of infighting and silos and blaming and so on. And one of the things that we implemented as part of that was a star process. And I literally took in stars that you get at the office supply store in the kindergarten area. And I had during the workshop that I did, I had each member write out 2 stars about what they appreciated about someone else in the organization. And that was such a powerful process for them and so simple, yet they are still doing it today. And so it has now gone from stars along the walls to stars on the ceiling because it has grown over those years. So just taking that time to really appreciate and making sure that you're letting people know in a timely way, just as you would let them know in a timely way that they need to make a change. We want to make sure that that level of appreciation is experienced prior to them forgetting they even did anything. Another thing that you may want to do is start to implement at the beginning of your team meetings that you spend 2 to 3 minutes just sharing what people are grateful for, of who's done what in the team, or even celebrating the successes of your clients, because many of you in the nonprofit world work with very chronic situations where there may not be as many successes. And so sharing them is a way of just continuing the motivation to keep up the work. And a good sort of strategy for gratitude or feedback of any sort, in fact, is to describe the situation. So like I said, so when you helped, I forget the name I chose, but let's say Patty, get that taxi ride to the hospital yesterday and get that covered financially, it was amazing because now we know that her health, that physical health issue isn't having the same impact on her mental health as it might have. So excellent work. Thank you for all that effort. And so it's acknowledging the effort and and what people are doing, pardon me. So let's talk about felt gratitude, because if we do gratitude, but people don't experience it as true gratitude. I remember in my toxic place that one year they went around and they gave us each a keychain to say thank you for what we did. And yet in a few months earlier, a few weeks prior to that, I'd had a conversation with my supervisor about how I'd been covering for about 3 months for another coworker, and it was pretty exhausting covering both roles, and it was a lot of work. And she confronted me saying, it isn't possible to do 2 jobs, and no, you're not doing 2 full jobs. You're just helping out. And so frankly, I won't tell you what I felt like doing with the keychain, but it really, it didn't help me. It demotivated me instead of helping. So if you're giving gifts, make sure they matter, and they don't have to be big gifts. That keychain probably worked for other people in the crowd that had been giving gratitude or appreciation. So if you're giving gifts like a coffee card, don't give a Starbucks card to somebody on your team who maybe doesn't drink coffee. So it's just giving that extra little thought and making sure that you actually get to know your team members as individual people, not just as a team member. What's important to them? What are their values? What are their goals as a person as well as professionally? And again, sharing personally on one-to-one for introverts is going to be appreciated. If you, call them out in a meeting and say, excellent job, they're probably going to want to shrink underneath the table. So making sure that you do it in a way that fits the personality of the individual. And your extroverts, you're going to want to put it in a meeting and say, great job, Joan, for all that work. And putting the extra time and effort into the schedule. I recognize that I've heard great feedback from many people of how much that works better in their lives and gives them more freedom. So thank you very much for that effort. And we want to make sure that every single time that we do gratitude, it is very genuine. Everything that you do as a leader ought best to come from a genuine place. So I worked with one leader and he would be over the top in terms of appreciation. Oh, Mel, that was the absolute best report that was ever written. And then around the corner would be something in store for Mel that wasn't positive or pleasant. And so because he wasn't being honest with his praise, he was causing more difficulty, and his staff were very anxious because he did praise, but he didn't hold people accountable. And the feedback that I got during that discovery was people didn't understand what they were expected to do. There was no clarity. So as you're looking at your gratitude practice, look at doing it, once a week on a Friday afternoon. Take 15 minutes, reflect on your week. What have you heard that was positive that week? What did you notice in another person? And take 15 minutes to, send out a few emails, write a couple of sticky notes, or if you have the budget, get some really nice personal cards that you can fill out and send to the individual. And I'll tell you that when people feel appreciated, the amount of effort that they will give your organization will grow exponentially. To trust or not to trust is a huge question. When we get into trust, and our brain chemistry becomes very involved. Trust requires consistency. So I need to show up at work at the same time, depending on whether you have flex schedule, that's a totally different thing. But being consistent in my mood, my attitude, I need to be consistent in how as a leader, how I'm treating each individual. I need to be consistent that I hold everybody accountable to the same standards. And trust is very much built. In the olden days, I'll say, we used to think it was earned or was granted and not earned. And that is very much not the case. We need to treat people with deep respect, with deep dignity, and we need to, even when we don't like them. So when you're going in and we don't like everybody, but if you have to go in and have a conversation with someone you don't like, I'm going to give you my mosquito rule. Years ago, when I was a therapist, I had this woman who suffered greatly from bipolar disorder and was chronically and consistently depressed. And because of her depression, was extremely negative. I had to meet with her on a weekly basis to support her, and it was really difficult at first. And then what I started to do was, while I was walking down the hallway to pick her up for the appointment, I would start to think about, what do I like about, and we'll call her Margaret, that is not her real name, but we'll say Margaret. And I would start to think positive thoughts about Margaret. And I'll tell you that when I started doing this, it was the tiniest little thing that I could think about. You know, she was always on time for her appointments. And I built on that positivity, and I kept building on it and kept building on it. And over time, she got better. So I started with that tiny little mosquito that I could find in her that I appreciated. So look for the mosquitoes, especially when you're about to go into a difficult conversation with somebody. Think about, what is it that I actually like about that person, so that your brain chemistry starts to shift. Because when you're inconsistent and you go in disliking the person and focusing on all the things that aren't going well, that person's brain's going to fire off in less than a second and have mistrust and go, oh my goodness, what's going to happen? And they'll start to jump to a whole bunch of conclusions about what the conversation's about. Trust also requires vulnerability. So it's not as a leader that you should know everything or have all the answers. That's not what people would expect of you. But instead, it's about, how do you let people know where you need help, where you need growth. It may be something as simple as asking for feedback yourself, you know, and being vulnerable with your team. How could I be an even better leader for you? What's one thing that I could stop doing that would make your job easier? What's one thing that I could start doing that would help you in your role? So making it very tiny to begin with. Now, if you have a toxic workplace and you start to do this, chances are you won't get any response, because when we don't trust, we don't open up and we don't become vulnerable. And that's why sometimes as a leader, it's you that needs to come in and focus on, rather than feedback, actually feed forward. So encouraging based on specific behavior with a focus on growth and moving forward. And how can we look here at this given situation and have shared success? So stepping in without all the answers, letting people in the team know you don't have the answers, and generally speaking, you will gain a great deep amount of trust and respect when you do vulnerability at work. And if you want to do some reading on vulnerability at work, I highly recommend Brené Brown's work. She is a social worker, and she has done a tremendous amount of research around vulnerability, and it is well worth the read. Her work is very easy to put in place and to use. So it's actually quite practical, even though it's research-based. So when you're thinking about trust, think about how can you be consistent in your behavior? How can you make sure that what you say you follow through on? If you don't follow through on it, what can you then acknowledge that you've not fallen through on it and what your reasoning are, and then address what you're going to do differently in the future. Now, team trust, we need to understand where we're all coming from. And as I talked about earlier, sometimes what happens is individuals start to think that person, make a whole bunch of assumptions and judgments about another person. So how might you think about understanding each other in the team's worldview? And this is some work that I do on some appreciative inquiry work that I'm trained to do with people, that I come in and help them see what's positive and what's wonderful in each person and get them to know each other differently so that they can start to have a different relationship at work. And it's amazing when people start to understand people outside of the day-to-day work what can happen in terms of the support and encouragement that they can give one another once they understand what really works. So it's taking that time to ask those questions, to bring in that curiosity again, and to see what people need, want, and what's most important to them. Sometimes it's important to have time out where you're not having a meeting, but you're doing some fun things as a team and during work hours so that people aren't having to use their personal time. And I do appreciate very much that you are all doing way too much work with too little resources in this day and age. And yet, I'll tell you that when you do these things and you really appreciate and spend that time getting to know each other, the results can be exponential. The other thing around trust is transparency. So when you've made a mistake, standing up and owning it. I remember, it seems like 1,000 years ago, Carol O'Connor, who used to play Archie Bunker, I think it's back on the air now, his son had died of an overdose of drugs. And what he did that evening is he went on the news and he just said, "My son died of an overdose." What it in fact did is it stopped all the gossiping that they usually do, and it excuse me, and it was just the truth. Nobody can mess with the truth. It is there. I've taken responsibility. This is the truth of what's happened, and it takes that gossip energy out of it. So when we're transparent and say, "I don't know the answer. I'm not sure what to do with this. I'm thinking it through. Do you guys have any thoughts of how we might best do that?" And so just opening it up. Okay, Marina, do we have any questions at this point?
Yes, I just wanted to address, Sylvia, you've mentioned a few authors as we've been going through. I know Brené Brown is one that I highly recommend as well, and I know comes highly recommended from some of our other leadership coaches who present for us. So definitely encourage you to check her out if you haven't already. Did you have a couple of other authors that you could just maybe mention again, Sylvia? I know there was someone that you mentioned right back at the beginning of the session on the growth versus fixed mindset.
And that is Carol Dweck, D-W-E-C-K, and the book is Mindset. And an excellent book on trust is The Trust Edge by David Horsager, which is H-O-R-S-A-G-E-R. So there's 3 resources for you that I highly recommend.
That's great. Thank you for that, Sylvia, and we'll try to get that in the chat box for you all as well. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so at the end of the day or at the beginning of the day, it always starts with you. It starts with each of us as individuals and how we show up. So we're going to talk about energy right now. And when I'm talking about energy, I'm talking about the subtle energy field that Heart Math Institute has done research on and indicates that it can be felt within 10 feet of us. And so our mood actually enters a room before us. When a prison break is about to break out, you can actually feel the energy. There's a difference. It gets warmer in a prison before it's about to happen. And those studies have been shown. So again, in that 0.07 seconds of somebody seeing you, their brain through the mirror neurons feels your intention and then starts to create stories around your attention. So really looking at how are you showing up? Are you doing gratitude practice in the morning, or are you as a leader coming to work kind of grumpy and feeling overwhelmed and a little bit on the miserable side? Because if you're doing that, the mirror neurons are going to have people in fear versus engaging in trust. So think about what is it that you need to do for your own self-care? What is it that you're doing to really look after yourself? And look at it from all aspects of yourself: emotional, physical, mental, and spiritual. What are the practices that enlighten you, that light that spark up inside of you and help you to feel re-energized? It could be a trip to the beach. It could be reading a really good book. It could be running. It could be skiing. It could just be sitting in a quiet place for a while. It could be playing with your children or your dog. But become aware of what is it for you that makes you your absolute best, so that when you show up at work, your energy shows up, it's all, okay, things are good. You're bringing hope and optimism into the organization and really looking after yourself. You guys have a huge amount on your plate, and so really make sure that you're taking your breaks, that you're not working till 2 o'clock in the morning every morning, that you unplug from the cell phone and the emails and all that. A few hours a week, a day a week, a couple of days a week, every evening, you start to do things, because think about how is it that you are role modeling self-care or not role modeling self-care. As a leader, be open to feedback. Actually ask for feedback, and we've talked about the growth versus fixed mindset. How can you be even better? What's one thing? Take that personal responsibility. So when you've made a mistake, and we all make them, own up to them, make change, and then share your plan for change. So it's not about being perfect. We don't expect that of anyone. It is really just about taking care of yourself and showing up as a fully responsible being, so that when you're helping other people see their accountability and responsibility, you're already there and coming from that place. So it shows them that it's not just expected, it's reciprocated. And for goodness sakes, be honest with yourself. Some days we're the dog looking in the mirror and feel like a shy little, I don't feel like I have it in me today. And other days we look in and think, oh man, I'm that little kitten, but I could roar like a lion. Be honest with yourself when you look in the mirror. You know, rate yourself. Where are you on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of accountability and comfort with accountability? Where are you around your comfort with conflict? If you're uncomfortable with conflict and that's where you're coming from, it's going to make it really difficult to be effective around conflict in your organization. Where's your gratitude practice at, personally, but also within your team? How much do people trust you? And what's your level of self-care and self-awareness? So rate yourself and then create a plan of maybe one thing per section that you can start to do to make you the best possible leader that your team members can have. So in summary from today, I'm going to say to you, for goodness sakes, own your abilities. So if you are that big dog in the mirror, stop shrinking and pretending you're small. As Marianne Christensen said many, many years ago, your playing small does not serve the world. Please look up that quote, it's amazing. Celebrate your successes as an individual, as team members. Encourage your team to celebrate those successes. They're hard won and they deserve every bit of celebration that you can give them. Own your challenges, because as we own our challenges, that is the seed of possibility. When we pretend we don't have challenges, we become incredibly powerless to make any change or make it better. Own all of your responsibilities. And I don't mean this at all from a blaming perspective. I just mean show up, be responsible, ask for help when it's tough. Say you can't do it, set boundaries, but be responsible for yourself with self-care and all the best. And own your mistakes, because that's where we can grow. Mistakes are just opportunities to get even better and be even more. So now I'd like to open the lines for any questions that anybody has. This is my contact information. If you wish, you can sign up for my blog. There's no obligation with that. You just go to the website where it says, and as a bonus, you'll get to download 2 free copies of my book at no expense to you. So Marina, if we could open it up for any questions on the line.
Yes, that's great. Thank you, Sylvia. So we have had lots of questions coming in, but if you do still have questions, please pop them in the question box. We'll get to as many as we can in the short Q&A that we have today. So Sylvia, let's maybe start with we had some questions about feedback. So we had a leader who was saying that they try to give positive feedback to their team, but they were called out when they were doing that they weren't necessarily being fair because they, in calling out some folks who went maybe above and beyond, they weren't calling out other folks who weren't. Do you have any thoughts on that, or how someone can, better bring that together and integrate that on the team?
So what I might suggest in that situation is that you actually have almost like a little matrix that you create, and that when you're giving positive feedback, you just check off beside the person's name for that week or the number of times you've done it. It'll just sort of give you a little bit of a reality of how many times that you've given maybe John versus Berta feedback. The other place that I might wonder is there's a possibility that you may need to give, you may need to, let me try that in English. You may need to be doing a little bit more accountability than you have been doing. So that you see, so people have that opportunity for growth so that you can then go in and give them the positive, appreciative feedback.
That's great. That's such a wonderful, tangible tip to use when doing that. That's awesome. Now, we've had quite a few questions on the theme, so I do want to address it. For leaders who are dealing with a team that generally seems to be working together quite well, except for maybe one or two members, do you have suggestions on how to approach a situation like that?
Yes, so then I would be looking at and having some frank conversations with the other, say in the example, two members of the team that aren't functioning as well. And I wouldn't be coming in, so I would be coming in sort of like Columbo the detective. Help me understand, how are things going for you? What are the challenges you're currently experiencing? You know, maybe it's, you don't seem quite as happy as you have been before. Is something going on that I can support you with? So going in with that level of curiosity to just see what's happening for those folks. Maybe they're needing more support than they are getting. It's possible that they're not in the right role that serves them where they can serve best. So getting curious and understanding what's going on. And it may be that other things are happening where the team looks like it's functioning really well and no one's speaking to it and it's getting played out.
That makes a lot of sense as well. Now we have a couple of questions about different work environments that I want to address. So first of all, you know, a lot of nonprofit organizations are dealing with teams where they might have contract workers, relief workers, volunteers, students. People are kind of coming and going. Are there tips that you can share for creating this more positive team environment when you are in that slightly more maybe unstable situation in terms of team dynamics?
Some of it I think needs to happen during the onboarding, where you make clear what the expectations of the organization are. And again, sometimes with the more remote, like the relief and so on, sometimes situations happen because they're not feeling that they're getting the communication they need to do. So they're not feeling as aware up front, not up front, as aware of what's going on in the organization. So sometimes putting in places like a weekly feedback email or newsletter that's saying, here's the following things that are going on in the organization, that's sent out to everybody. Can save a lot of time and energy and frustration for workers that are sort of on the fringe, not necessarily understanding what's going on. I think too, when you bring them in and you engage them with positives as well and acknowledging what they're doing well can help, and helping a volunteer coordinator, for example, do that work.
that's really helpful. And then just shifting a little bit to a slightly different team environment. Some folks on the call today are working in more remote teams. Do you have any suggestions for that?
Okay, so my suggestions for remote teams are you need to bring people together more often. So it's because we can get so busy in the nonprofit work, just with day-to-day things, doing things like having a morning Zoom and Zoom's an online web system that's pretty easy to do, so that everybody can see each other's faces every Monday morning, say, or maybe for a sort of one of those 10-minute stand-up meetings where it's not taking a great deal of time, but the expectations we're in. We do a quick thing on what are we doing well, what are our challenges for the week, how can we best support each other for the week. So they almost become a form of an accountability call. So bringing the team together a few times a year, probably quarterly would be good as well if it's not done more often than that. Because we get busy, it's easy to silo without meaning to. So it's creating those places where there's opportunity and almost expectation of connection. Because what I've found when I'm working with remote teams is people say, well, I don't want to bug John because I know he's really busy, where if I was in a physical workplace with John, I might drop by his desk. So is texting for John just like dropping by his desk? And asking each person in the team what their preferred mode of communication is. What's the best way to reach them? How would they prefer that I ask them a question if I need their help or need to chat with them for a minute about something?
Oh, that's excellent. And I can say, working with a remote team myself, those are all really great tips. Okay, so here's another really good question. What can middle managers do if there's a lack of accountability, candor, and compassion at the senior level?
Depending on your comfort with your manager, you can manage up, which is just saying, I'm concerned, I'm wanting to grow, and what I'm needing from you to be the best manager that I can be, or supervisor that I can be. I would very much appreciate if you could give me feedback in these following areas. And again, so you could reverse what I said before. So what's one thing from your perspective that I could be doing even better to be a better leader? Is there anything that I need to stop doing that isn't necessary? How could, making a request for supervision, could I meet with you on a weekly or a bi-weekly basis just to go over how I'm doing? And continue to invite that candor, letting them know that you do, and then when they do give you that candor, then appreciate it and thank them for it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's kind of building up a muscle, if you will.
Yeah, that's great. Now, Sylvia, I believe earlier in the presentation you mentioned systemic conflict. Could you give an example of what you meant by that?
So systemic conflict is, okay, I'm just thinking about when I started working with one organization, there's a lot of conflict, but the conflict isn't regularly discussed. So they go on and it's almost like they have pink glasses on and they aren't seeing the conflict, but all the conflict is happening at a systemic level, and it's been happening 3 executive directors prior. So that culture was about 15 years ago, that culture of dysfunction was set up, and it's just continued along the line. Now, how that shows up is, I'm trying to create a vagueness in my story here, but a customer appreciation, client appreciation event that should have been a ton of fun to do became a fighting zone for two of the employees, that it negatively impacted the celebration for the clients. And then went on, and the conversation went on and on and on for months after that event, and it didn't get resolved, and because no one held a, and it didn't get resolved, sorry, until someone held a meeting where all of the players were in the room, and then people were encouraged to take responsibility for their role in it. And it was looked at as in, okay, that's what happened this time. We're doing sort of a post-mortem, not to blame people, but to say, what do we need to do differently next time? So that was a systemic piece of conflict that was happening that looked very much like the two individuals involved in event planning were actually in conflict with each other. They weren't in conflict with each other so much as they were expressing the conflict that was already happening in the system from all the secrets and the lack of transparency that had been in the organization for about 15 years. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think that does. That's very helpful. Sylvia, I see that we're coming up on the hour, so I think we're going to end questions there. Did you have any final comments you wanted to leave folks with?
Well, so again, for me, it is always about what can I own? What is within my power to make change? How can I show up in my best possible place to be of most service? I have given you my contact information. If I can be of support to you in your organization, please give me an email. You can call me as well. And if you have questions, I'm open to answering them to the best of my ability. And I just wish you all well. And from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank each and every one of you for all the work that you do day in and day out to make our world a better place. My God, we need you so much right now. Thank you.
Hear, hear. That is a big message of gratitude that I would like to share, Sylvia. And we want to thank you as well. Thank you for coming and sharing your expertise today. Thank you for struggling through when I know that you are on the tail end of a bad cold, and we so appreciate it. So I think this has probably been a very helpful approach for folks to think about today, maybe some new strategies to think about. I want to remind you that we will follow up with you by email this afternoon or by tomorrow morning at the latest with the webinar recording and the slide deck, so you can go back if you need to and take a look. You can also share that with anybody that you think would benefit in your network. There will be a short survey as well that will take less than 5 minutes to fill out. We hope that you'll complete that for us if you can. You can let us know there if there's other topics you'd like to see covered in a future session. We'll also be sure to share feedback with Sylvia as well. So if there's anything you'd like to be sure that Sylvia hears, pop that into the feedback. Our next free webinar is coming up on July 25th. We're going to be discussing another very important topic, which is self-care. There will be a link to register in the email you receive later today or tomorrow. With that, I'd like to thank you all again very much for joining us today, and I hope that we will see you next week. Bye-bye.